As a Manhattan jury continues to deliberate whether Donald Trump is guilty of election interference, Trump supporters across the country are trying to reassure themselves that the outcome will not affect the election. But liberal Fox News commentator Marie Harf pointed out to her MAGA co-host that the defection of even a small number of Republican voters will destroy Trump's chances at winning. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. All right, friends, I have a clip to show you here, an exchange between a liberal Fox News commentator and her MAGA co-host. But before I play that clip, I've just got to set the table. So polls have shown over the past several months that if Donald Trump is convicted in any of the legal, debacles in which he finds himself, that it would shift a meaningful number of voters against him. Okay. But a recent Marist College poll indicates that that number is actually much smaller. About 67% of the respondents say that no matter if Trump is convicted or exonerated, it's not going to affect how they're going to vote. Now, if you're a Trump supporter and you believe that the jury in this Manhattan trial will come back with a conviction, which is not certain, but very likely, this is good news, right? Because it means that even if Trump is convicted, very few or relatively few will actually be impacted by a potential conviction. But Marie Harf, this liberal Fox News commentator, makes a really good point that Donald Trump really has no margin for error with respect to the vote share.
Up some of that limelight from the cameras.
It's interesting. You're right that many people have already baked this into their vote. But we know this election is going to be very close. A couple thousand voters in like 5 or 6 states. So even if 2%, 3%, 5% of voters change their vote because of this, that is enough to change a very close election. And I think what the Biden team is thinking about right now is whether if people decide not to vote for Trump, they will then go to Biden. Or maybe they'll sit home. Maybe they'll vote for a third-party candidate.
RFK Jr.?
Exactly. So the Biden team, I think, knows that there is some percentage of humans, based on polling, who will not vote for Trump if he's convicted. How do you get them?
Yes, that's a very important point to make. We're actually going to play more of this clip in just a minute. They changed topics somewhat to the presidential debate, but I also want to explore this a bit more. So again, I'm not doubting the veracity of this poll. I do want to say, though, that it shows a tightening of the number of people who would be impacted by a conviction compared to earlier polls. So it could be an outlier, or it could be indicative of a trend that people, having heard somewhat about this trial, having had additional weeks or months to process who to vote for, that they've decided that really no matter what the outcome, most people they already have their opinions about Trump and how they plan to vote for or against Trump already set in stone. But I want to look into this Marist national poll a bit more. So these are the top line notes. November's presidential election, May 2024. So it's not all bad news for President Biden, okay? So Biden actually leads in terms of registered voters nationally. So 2 points separate Biden at 50% and Trump 48% among registered national voters. Okay, that's good for Biden. That means that among people who are registered to vote, even now, even though he's experiencing some ridiculously low popularity and approval numbers, he's still pulling ahead of Trump. But it's not all good news for Biden either. So Trump leads Biden 54 to 42% among independent voters. But then it switches back to Biden when you consider people who despise both candidates, so-called double haters. However, Biden leads 49 and Trump 47 among people who have unfavorable views of both candidates, so-called double haters. Now, when you add RFK Jr. to the mix, you add a third party, Trump, then the advantage swings back to him, 44% to 40%. I'll also point out that Jill Stein, RFK Jr., Dr. Cornel West, none of these people have any chance of winning the presidency. RFK Jr. of the three has by far the best chance, but even then, it's not saying much. I mean, as I pointed out on Twitter somewhat smugly, President Biden could slip into a coma today and then emerge from the coma the day before the election, and he will still win more of the vote share than, yes, RFK Jr. and certainly Dr. Stein and Dr. West. So there's really no point in pretending that these people have a viable path to victory. At the end of the election, either Donald Trump will win or Joe Biden. That's it. Those are your only options if you're being practical. Also, it points out that Kennedy pulls support evenly from both Biden and Trump. However, among Biden supporters from a Biden-Trump matchup, Stein receives 5% and West receives 4%. Obviously, very few Trump supporters are going to vote for Dr. Stein or Dr. West. So again, not all bad news for Biden, but not all great news either. So according to the man who, or the person who directed this poll, quote, despite Biden's campaign appearances and Trump's court appearances, the contest for president has been and remains tight. When it comes to this rematch, it's as if voters are saying, tell me something about Biden and Trump I don't already know. But again, as we talked about, as Marie points out, a small percentage of the vote share being affected by this outcome, if it is indeed a conviction, which it's not set in stone, the jury has not come back at the time of recording with a verdict. It's just conviction is most likely, then a hung jury, and then a full-on acquittal is the least likely. Even a small percentage of defectors, people who either vote for Biden or, as Marie Harf points out, just stay home or vote somebody else. That would be bad news for Trump. So as the LA Times breaks it down, so could a conviction affect the election? Maybe. If Trump loses in court, Biden and the rest of the country can call him a convicted felon from now until November. And even a small number of Republicans and undecided voters can swing an election that is expected to be extremely close. The USA Today Suffolk poll found independent voters were evenly divided, 37 to 37, on whether Trump's trial is fair or not, leaving more room for at least some voters to be swayed by a verdict. In a vacuum, this verdict could continue right through the election because it will be a conviction. It will be historical. But again, not set in stone. So it's just important to point that out, that even though it seems bewildering and discouraging that a potential conviction is irrelevant to a decisive majority of American voters, there's still enough room here where it could be potentially disastrous for Trump. Now, I want to play the rest of this clip, this exchange between Marie Harf and Harris Faulkner, when the topic turns to debate and whether or not Trump's increasingly likely, but again, uncertain conviction could be used by President Biden as a predicate not to debate Trump.
That's the question.
I want to ask you a quick follow-up because I am curious about, how Donald Trump and Joe Biden go forward with the debate with all of this. We were talking about it last segment in terms of, what if one has to be sequestered legally, that being Trump, and what that looks like. It seems like the baked-in excuse for Biden might have been, I get to say the word conviction now, and maybe I'll back out because I don't want to, I want to be able to tell America, I'm not going to debate him because he's been found guilty of something.
I think Joe Biden will debate. I think he wants to debate. I think he will use that conviction over and over again in the debate. I have also repeatedly said on TV that Joe Biden needs to be preparing for a debate that is different than any other debate he's been in. Donald Trump is a very good debater at taking the limelight, at taking the narrative, at taking the topic.
He even works the courthouse.
Exactly. And I don't agree with what he says, but he's really good at it. And so I want the Biden team preparing not just to say convicted felon, to actually be able to go at Trump in that debate.
So I think Marie Harf I think there's some substance to what she's saying. I do think she's being a bit too charitable to Trump here. Trump is not a good debater. Trump, when it comes to policy knowledge, Trump, when it comes to substantive answers, he's always been terrible. He is good at performing. And to the extent that you think that, a debate is purely about performance and nothing about substance, then that's fair. But it's almost like saying a pigeon's really good at chess because they can, shit all over the board, right? And you can't counter that. Well, no, to the extent that anybody expects substantive answers or answers that are not non sequiturs that actually address the question to any extent, Trump is terrible. But again, really good at performing, very good at heckling, very good at interrupting and trying to take the limelight. So he has some advantages which could prove, distracting to President Biden. I think that I've said this before. There's no question that even if you have doubts about Biden's mental acuity, which, by the way, again, according to poll after poll after poll, a majority of Americans have doubts about both candidates' acuity. The fact of the matter is Biden is more experienced, Biden is more knowledgeable on the substance, and Biden can engage with questions more substantively. But I do agree that he is more prone to distraction. So if he's trying to give a substantive answer and Trump keeps running his mouth off camera and Biden, it could be a potential for Biden to be distracted and get into a back and forth. But also, to be fair, we've seen during State of the Union addresses where Biden is actually pretty good at improvising when he's being heckled by Republicans. So it depends on what version of Joe Biden we get that day. If we get dark Brandon or if we get super serious, not playful Joe Biden. But there are some risks there. And I do agree that on the substance that Marie Harf is correct in the sense that Biden does need to continue to prepare on the substance and prepare for the unexpected, because Trump is a very mercurial candidate. But yeah, so again, verdict is still pending. We don't know what the outcome will be. I'm not taking any victory laps. I don't think you should either. But even this particular poll does not say that nobody will be swayed by the outcome. If Trump is convicted, a small number of Americans, but a meaningful number of Americans say that would impact how they vote. And Donald Trump can't afford to lose any of them. So let me know what you think in the comments.